Is Brian going to be here today too?
Recording is on.
I know when Brian arrives, just like you guys.
Yeah, well, I guess one of the things that I figured we would need him around for is to talk about that grant application, but I can
Let's
just
jump
email
through.
him that.
Yeah, let's jump through updates. He's been arriving just a smidge late recently, so we'll just hope that's the case here, and if not, we'll have to catch him asynchronously. So we'll skip both the Brian's. Hans, updates? Oh, can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, so I've pushed some more fixes for some stuff in various places. It's all pushed up to the repo, just random stuff. And I have started working on like the basic typing infrastructure, so we can get like at least the bare minimum advantages. I've been reading the papers and stuff related to the typing effort done at SSA level in the Beam compiler. So
They actually did a paper on it?
Well, they don't have a paper on that specifically, but they have some papers linked in the source, like the success typing paper, for example.
Sure, yeah.
A lot of that is based on that. So I mean, I'm basing. I mean, the approach is relatively straightforward. It's like what you would imagine doing typing like that would look like, but I'm just like mostly doing the same thing. Yeah.
Brian Joseph, sorry, I just skipped over your spot in line when you came in, so I'll back up. Any updates for us?
No, I did have some questions.
Wait, before you get into the questions, let's get through the rest of the updates, and then I'll come back to you. Okay?
Okay.
Sounds good. Luke.
With the new runtime changes, liblumen web tests pass, so like the changes work for a WASM target, so that's nice. I'm now updating the spawn chain demo. The Linux builds failed in the branch, but that's because the Docker image isn't updated with the changes from develop, so I just need to do that so that the Linux builds will see the alloc changes and alloc ref changes that we already incorporated correctly.
And one more thing, just real quick. I also merged in the Lumen branch to master. But the one change is that the master branch is still on my versions of all the different crates. So I'm still on like the previous version of the alloc traits, but it shouldn't be that much like blocking us from going to the new one. But yeah, like I feel like I don't know how much longer they're going to keep changing around stuff, but like maybe it would make sense to just stay on one version until they finish it up, because there is like a period of time. I talked to one of the guys that's doing it. There is like a period of time now where they're doing it, and then they're going to aim to stabilize it after a little while. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can get a little bit more into that after, but I think, you know, the problem that we ran into when we were just sticking with one version is that the setup, like getting started process for anybody that wants to get involved, becomes a little bit more of a pain, where if we're forced to try and stay up to speed than somebody just installing Rust and starting to play around.
But then we could say like, okay, this it's known to compile on this version, and then in my mind at least, it's even worse if you just say like, okay, download latest nightly, and then they change something randomly, and then it doesn't work for them, so then they need to dig around.
Yeah.
The README technically says both.
Either, but
the README says both. It says try nightly, and if it doesn't work, here's the version CI is using. And realistically, the core team, because it came up when I submitted a PR to update DL Malloc, that like the old version of AllecRef, they just like, the core team doesn't want to support both versions. They only assume like the latest version of the unstable is the version that they support. So like they actually didn't accept the PR because the team doing it knew they were going to do the current changes that they did now. So I'm going to try resubmitting and see if they'll accept it upstream or not. But I would kind of say like the core team never thinks of, unfortunately, these things that are in flux as being like that they need to be supported long term.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense because that's kind of the whole premise of unstable. But the problem I think that we've got is that we're sort of stuck in two ways. One, it's fairly easy to integrate forward, but we have a handful of dependencies. Well, yeah, a handful of dependencies that basically make that awkward because right now, namely hash brown, I think is the big one, and some of its associated crates make use, or well, the changes Hans made to those crates make them implicitly depend on the alloc interface. And so any changes to those, to the alloc interface affect both those crates and ours. But because Hans has PRs open to merge the alloc stuff into those crates, they're kind of in flux because until the alloc interface stabilizes, they're not going to merge those changes. So it's this weird situation where we're kind of stuck. If any of our dependencies update themselves to support the latest nightly, but not all of them do, then it's the build is broken both in old nightlies and new ones. So it's a little bit annoying, but we just have to be very careful to not update dependencies in that case. Where it gets weird is if we have to add new dependencies for something that we're working on, but I think at this point we don't really have anything we need new dependencies for. I think that was kind of why we were bouncing back and forth on whether or not to pin a version of the compiler to build against, because some of that stuff was in flux. I know I got bit in particular by not being able to move forward and not being able to move backward. So by just moving forward, it forced us to try and stay up to date with it. But I mean, I don't know how many more changes are really going to be made there at this point. I guess we could go review some of the open PRs and issues and see what the proposed changes are at this point.
The maintainer of Hashbrown, who's also apparently on like the allocation team or task force or whatever you call it, he said that he would come back and like notify us when things had started stabilizing. He might have forgotten, but might make sense to like post there again. But yeah,
I feel like if we don't stay on top of that ourselves, like they're not going to remember that. Like people get way too busy to remember to update us on that stuff, unless you're in regular contact.
There aren't that many like open PRs on the Hashbrown repo, I think. Yeah, but whatever. We should like revisit it. I would guess they've changed around on most of the traits, I think now. So I would guess they're at like at least approaching the end. I don't know.
Yeah, that was the thing. Is like there was one. There was a major change to alloc ref, and then there was one more breaking change after that. I haven't looked in the past like 2 weeks to see if there's anything new that has changed there. But I get the sense that it's getting close to stabilization. At this point, it might be a matter of whether they make something return a result or not, or whether something has a particular type or a different one, or like fairly small mechanical changes that could be made, and not anything like major refactoring wise, but who knows.
Usually what it seems to happen is they like go through the types and the soundness and realize that like, oh, this doesn't have to be unsafe, is usually what the stabilization does.
Right. Yeah, and that was one of the major breaking changes, was that alloc is no longer an unsafe function. And I think, no, that was the major one. I was thinking that maybe something no longer return result they used to, but they still do, I think, in general. So.
I mean, the memory block being everywhere instead of the tuple was a big change too.
Yeah, that was obviously huge. But that one I think was easier to deal with than I was expecting originally. Since the way that we had actually written our custom allocation, I think probably people in general that was something that we more or less already had to deal with anyways. So it was sort of a natural update, making that part of the interface. I'm glad they defined that type too, because it's sort of helpful to have a representation of that. I know that I defined one in liblumen core just for representing like regions of memory. So in any case.
Luke, any other updates from you?
No other updates. We'll see how long it takes. But once spawn chain is done, that should be the entire like things that depend on full, and then I'll go back and figure out if I can write enough Erlang in the Lumen crate to match the tests, because I'm not going to try to get minimal to run the same tests as full, because I'd have to write some macro to change how code is set up, and like I can't, like it's hard to, I'd have to write assembly, and that's silly when we have a compiler. So
yeah,
I might just, if it all works, I might just commit this, because it's taken like how many weeks now with the interruption and everything, and I
yeah,
would just push up the PR as is, and minimal won't work, but I'll add something so that the tests don't try to run and break the build, and then I will go back and start writing Erlang tests for it. I just don't know if we have enough parts that are compilable to have tests that fail in a way that work as a good test framework, because I don't think we can run com tests or XUnit yet. Like we don't have enough of this stuff. Right?
yeah, no, but I guess I can just go quick. So the past week I wasn't able to do a whole lot, but the main thing left for me at this point is to fix up the scheduling changes I made in the minimal crate, and then everything should basically be in place. And so that covers like the breadth of things that we talked the last time. So binary construction, pattern matching, receives, the exception handling changes. So with that in place, I think we would have enough primitives to start defining kind of like the OTP standard library pieces needed to start building up some of those higher level options like the test runner and things like that.
Yeah, I think we can get around the test problem potentially, because we can just have the thing print something and then have the Rust test runner check the output. And so like some of the stuff that's needed in a real Erlang only test framework, we won't need. So there might be a workaround around it even without receive, but obviously common test and XUnit both need receive for them to work, because they're, processes.
Yeah, I think, we can at least write some integration tests without any sort of test framework at all that just builds executables for programs that only return a success code if they actually succeed, and otherwise don't. And then just check the exit status or check for something to be printed or whatever. But build up a set of tests that cover like the core functionality using that approach, and then get enough of the OTP pieces in place to actually run things with like the Erlang test suite. I don't know if common test is the best way to do that, but whatever approach we think makes the most sense there.
Receive and Elixir script is definitely where I like stopped basically, and just tried my best to like figure out how the heck to make processes work in JavaScript. And
yeah, it would be really, really difficult without basically the cheats that I'm able to use, and this is for x86 and native targets right now. So the question of WebAssembly still has some open pieces, but when you can generate code to do what you need to do, that makes implementing things like that a lot easier.
Yeah.
Brian, do you want to ask your questions now? I think we've covered everybody's updates. Thanks for letting me hold you off.
No problem. Well, I guess one question. Y'all might have talked about it while I was talking about Rust, but so the stable version of Rust is out of the question right now.
The stable version of Rust? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're never probably going to be able to support stable Rust, at least not for the foreseeable future.
We use unstable stuff for our macros, so no, never.
Yeah, maybe in like a year or something, enough will have stabilized that we can use it. But right now, we're using two features that are unlikely to ever be stabilized: naked functions and inline assembly. Now, the inline assembly that we write, we may be able to use the new inline assembly macro that's coming to nightly, but or already is in there. But naked functions is not something that we'll be able to avoid, at least in the near future. We might be able to reevaluate whether or not we actually need them to be naked, but I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we're using that's like super unstable and never going to be stabilized. Those are the two that come to mind, I guess. What are we using in the macros again, Luke? That
just proc attribute macros in general are considered unstable because they never want to stabilize what the AST looks like.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So that is another one of those that's unlikely to ever change.
Isn't like I haven't paid attention to that in a while, but isn't what they were planning on doing just giving you like a buffer with just tokens as text, and then you had to parse it yourself and generate the new? I seem to remember something like that.
Maybe. I mean, the nice thing that we have is that like I think it's Sin. I can't remember if it's Sin or if it's the other one where if it's parse 2, where we only get good code spans in proc macro attributes because of an unstable feature. Like weirdly, code span reporting is unstable for some reason, even though like the real compiler does it. But like us being able to do it in technically userland, like we only get that because of unstable.
Got it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pain point for sure. At some point, they're going to have to figure out what to do there. So I guess if they fix the core issue, which is that location information is kind of garbage without that. But yeah, if they fix it, then we might be able to slowly move away from nightly, but definitely not anytime soon.
The other way we would get around it, remember, a lot of that is for the NIFs, and if we get to the point where we're semi self-hosting and we start writing the NIFs in Erlang with intrinsics, maybe it won't matter as much, and we'll get away with it that way. But if we ever have to write something in Rust and we want good reporting, then yeah.
Yeah, that's true. If we're able to migrate more away from Rust and some of those components, then for sure we could avoid using some of those features. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is there a particular, motivation for that, Brian? Or like, is there a use case where like using nightly is a problem? Or are you just talking about the issue we were discussing before where nightly has been kind of causing some headaches?
Yeah, the issue before, and maybe just for less complexity and getting more people involved.
Yeah, I think that's a good point for sure. And I mean, part of the issue too is that we're using the features that changed, so that definitely added problems where there might not have been otherwise. Like if we were using nightly features but not alloc, for example, then we wouldn't have been bitten by that. But
yeah, the proc macro stuff is unstable because they never want to stabilize it, but like the actual how much does it change stability is fairly stable.
Yeah, but it is a good point that if there are headaches with using nightly for whatever reason, whatever that might be, it would be nice to have the option to not need that. But I think ultimately, once we get past the algorithm changes that are going on, like we're not using any new nightly features, and that's probably not going to change. So for our purposes, it's going to stabilize considerably. And then as soon as those nightly features stabilize enough, we can actually migrate to stable at some point. But
got it.
It's definitely annoying that, just to get started right now, you have to like install particular nightly version stuff.
What kind of feature flags are we using in like the main Lumen?
Shit, that's a good point. Yeah, there's actually quite a few that we're using across the different crates.
Almost every crate has at least 1 or 2 flags, and some of them have up to like 10.
Yeah, I think it's possible that several of them are no longer needed, but we might have to do an audit to see which ones are actually unnecessary.
I have tried my best to keep that to minimum in EIR, which is like more feasible there than in the main Lumen repo, but like there are still a couple around that are really like somewhat needed. So
the changes I made to migrate to the new AlecRef stuff, I removed quite a bit of code from liblumen core, and that stripped off a lot of the feature flags that were used there. And I think it's probably the case that we're either no longer using some of what originally motivated the use of those feature flags, or those features have now stabilized. But we haven't done an audit of that in a long time. I know I haven't looked since like last fall. There was a handy cargo extension that would do an audit of all the feature flags to figure out which ones it's stabilized. It still doesn't tell you if you're actually using those features, but
Well, if you just remove the don't warn if we're using a stable feature, it would tell you all of them right away. That just happens.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But you're right. Like if you're not using a feature, it doesn't detect it that way.
Right. It only tells you if it's a stabilized feature. And I think we would have to just like remove features and see if the build fails for each one of those. If it's not immediately obvious, why we were using that feature in the first place. I think specialization is the main one that we're using in quite a few places, but that's something that's likely to stabilize before long.
The issue for specialization still has the open problem with the soundness.
Yeah.
So I don't know if someone's addressing the soundness.
I don't think that's an open problem anymore. Wasn't a solution presented for that, and they're just like not entirely like certain on it yet. I think they have like come to a consensus.
Well, the top description still has the soundness bug is like not checked, so I assumed that like it's not solved.
Yeah, I think it's not implemented. The solution is not implemented, but I don't know that they don't know what the answer to that question is. Just that it hasn't been resolved because it has fairly wide-ranging impact, but I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I looked at that.
I think
feature list.
All of that is blocked by chalk.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's why they don't want to invest more into the current like trait solving system before they actually move to chalk.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the status of that is. It feels like it's been an open thing for a long time now to get that.
I think Rust Analyzer uses chalk, I think, so they have validated it there at least, but I don't know what the status is on actual Rust C. It's kind of slowed down a bit.
Yeah, so that would be the main one that I think we would not be able to get rid of because we're using specialization in quite a few places. But I guess it would always be possible for us to revisit our uses and see if we actually need them anymore, or if we can like refactor use things differently. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too many that we're actively using. It's just a lot of the implementation of the lower level pieces of the runtime make use of what are basically intrinsics or like internals of the standard library. Like the liblumen arena crate, for example, makes use of like the ravec internals and a few other things, but it's possible those could be just refactored to avoid that.
Got it.
Any other questions, Brian?
Yeah. So, when we brought up EIR, a friend of mine was interested in that project in particular. That should I just point them to the Lumen channel in Elixir Slack, or is there
Yeah.
another place?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Do you know what context?
I think something about creating a language and using it to not do some things. I don't know. I have to go back and leave this conversation.
Yeah, just send him over. It'll be fun to talk to him.
Cool.
Anything else?
Any? Well, I guess we're on hold with the website stuff, right?
Technically, the website is up, so we can add stuff now. We've just all been busy. If you have things to put on the website, that would be great. You know, like any community news about Lumen, we want to go on there. Plus everything that we should have already put on the website, but we didn't because we were holding on the website. That all needs to be backfilled also.
Got it. Okay.
Can anybody add stuff, or how do we get stuff?
It's a public repo, so you just PR to it the same way you do for like Elixir Lang.
Okay.
The deploy is not automatic though. I would have to bug other Brian about how the Netlify thing works and figure out how to automate it with GitHub Actions.
Is it Netlify or is it GitHub Pages?
Yeah, I thought we set up to. Yeah, we did. It's
okay.
GitHub Pages.
So yeah, it's just a GitHub Pages thing. So yeah, when you do a PR to the GitHub the GH Pages branch, it'll just deploy. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been meaning to take some time and try and do something with that, but I just have been overwhelmingly busy.
Yeah, realistically, we probably should anytime we've personally talked, add it to the timeline of blog posts and conference talks or whatever. Which we don't even have a page for that yet.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess. Hans lost his battery. I think that's everything for now. The changes that I was talking about with fixing the minimal scheduler for the changes that I've made, I'll get that done this week and then let you guys know once that is ready. And hopefully we can start actually building stuff on top of that.
Okay, are we ready to talk about the grant then? I mean, we need Hans on to do that, but
there's no point. I mean, you and I can discuss it briefly, I guess. But I think without Brian, we're sort of blocked on that. But my feeling is that we should do it. I think have Brian be our point of contact, and I can respond to Hans with the information that he wanted.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure if we need a legal entity to receive the money. I didn't even think of that.
Which is why I figured Brian would make the most sense as a point of contact, because it could be done via Dockyard. Mm-hmm. And I think that would make sense anyways, because obviously there's already the processes in place to deal with all the accounting and all that jazz. But that's why I wanted to get Brian's take, because if he's like, that's too much trouble or we don't want to do that, then the next step I think would be to set up, sort of like some organization for Lumen that's like nonprofit or whatever.
Yeah, we want to do what Elixir Lang did or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then we could handle it that way. But I would like to avoid one of us having to deal with that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And just be able to take advantage of what we already have in place for.
Yeah, and we kind of need Brian's input if the grant, because Dockyard's still looking for ROI on like the research
Yeah.
on this. So I don't know if they want it. I don't know if they would want to use. Obviously, you should get a portion of it because you're working a second job doing this, unlike me and Hans. And so there's that. But also, like, does the part that like me and Hans get just go to Dockyard to offset the costs, and or do we have to say some of it goes to like infrastructure to pay for more build boxes? For more system support. I don't know.
It seems to me that like where the value of the grant comes from is basically in subsidizing the cost of the project moving forward, right? So it's not so much to use it to pay for what we've already done, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but rather to pay for the efforts moving forward. So that's our individual time, Dockyard's investment in terms of hardware, infrastructure, whatever the case may be there, and potentially the ability to, help incentivize people to help contribute, right? So if somebody's willing to sit down and hammer out a feature that is important, we could use those funds to potentially provide some level of compensation. That becomes a very tricky conversation, I think, which is why I don't necessarily really want to go down that road, because then it's like anybody that contributes but doesn't get compensated feels like shafted. But it's something that's on the table essentially. So it could be used for like bounties, that kind of thing. I mean, but at least for us, it would provide a way to pay for the infrastructure costs at a minimum, and also provide a little bit of offset to Dockyard's expenses and our individual expenses.
Is there a oh crap. What was I gonna say? Oh, are there any project level artifacts that are needed for that to happen? And
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
a combined release with the Asterius, which is the Haskell on WASM group. So like we would do a combined release of like functional programming on WASM would be like what the overall goal of the grant would be, is like a way to summarize it. And we would do a combined release artifact of like, here's all the tools for doing. Like, I don't know how much like we actually need to share stuff, but we need to make like one product at the end. So we would have a coordinated release of whatever they would cut a release and ours would go in there and they'd go in the same tarball or something.
Yeah, I assume it'd be like one either toolkit that has all of the compilers in it, or links to all the individual releases and says here's the artifact for this release. But it seems like we'd be probably looking at like the end of the year for a release deadline for that, at least from what I gathered from Hans' last email. So
I
that
thought
would
the
be
grant was much longer than that. I thought
no,
it
he was estimating. He said it was about 6 months. They would be aiming for like 6 months past the point where they get the grant, which would be 3 months from now, I guess. So 9 months in total. So a little past the end of the year, but that would be like a rough estimate for when we might need to do that. So obviously, at that point, we would be much further along. And I think that definitely works for us. I was a little bit concerned that it might be, something real immediate, but it seems like it's a little bit longer time frame than that, which is cool. It means that we have more time to focus on the WebAssembly side of this, and really dig into the issues there. And I think that's where combining with the larger group of compiler languages, even if it's just the Asterius team, my hope is that we can collectively work a little bit harder on making the functional programming primitives in WebAssembly either there, present, period, or at least improve the situation so things are a little bit more amenable to compilers like ours.
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely have to get WebAssembly, mostly working for that, since that seems to be their goal for their side of the grant. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that. I think it's cool that they reached back out to us.
Should we do a group Slack on the public Elixir laying, or is it okay if I ping Brian on the Dockyard one where he's separate because he might see it sooner? Like, I don't know why he's not here right now. And then we loop you back in, Paul, once we get his attention, since he missed out on the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we can either do like a multi-person Slack on the Elixir one. I'm not sure if there's any limitations there or not.
Probably not. We would lose the
You can
history,
do a
but it should last for a
multi-person.
day or so.
You can do a multi-person DM.
Yeah, no, I know it will work. I'm just worried about it being lost super fast, but I think
Sure.
I think it should be fine for a day or so. And
Yeah.
only if Brian doesn't respond today will I check. I'll monitor the special project channel that he's still in, and if he shows activity there but doesn't respond, I'll ping him
Okay.
like as a one-person DM to try to get his attention.
Yeah, let's start the conversation on the Elixir Slack, because then I can at least dump some of my thoughts in there in the meantime. And then, like you say, if he doesn't respond in there, and it seems like those messages will be lost, then pinging him on the Dockyard Slack makes more sense.
Yeah, I probably should.
You've got about 10 days. I think you get 10 days before they get rid of stuff on the.
No, it's 10,000 messages, which is incredibly fast on the public Elixir line because it's the entire world's Elixir conversation. So it's like a day or two.
Well, let's put it this way. I sent him a message 8 days ago, which I can still see, but the one that's over 10 days old, I can't see. So
interesting.
Maybe
Yeah, and I've lost stuff fairly quick. Like conversations, somebody's pinged me, and then by the time I actually go look at it, it's already gone. Yeah. But that doesn't happen all the time. I think it depends on the overall quantity of messages.
Okay, yeah. We'll start a group. I guess I probably should forward him the email because he hasn't seen that yet.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm not sure why I didn't copy him on that. I probably should have. I wasn't even sure what the situation was going to be, I guess, initially. Yeah. But yeah, send that to him, and then he'll at least have an idea of what we're getting into.
Yeah, I'll copy him, but not back to the Tweak.io guys in case Brian says, like, no, I don't want to be legally responsible for this. I mean,
yeah, I can do a little bit of preliminary investigation just so that if Brian is like, no thanks, I can at least figure out what the next steps would be for us on tackling that.
If we need to do an Elixir laying style thing through Chris McCord and Brian, they both talked to Jose directly, and I've emailed him before, so maybe we could be like, how did you do Elixir's owned by the core contributors thing legally? And we can figure that out then.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think.
Alrighty. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Take care.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.